Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
3 Muslim students from the same family were killed by gunfire yesterday evening in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Police this morning arrested a 46-year-old white man named Craig Stephen Hicks in connection to the shootings that many in the community believe were motivated by Islamophobia. The victims were 23-year-old Dia Shadi Barakat, his 21-year-old wife Yusra Abu Salha, and her 19-year-old sister Razan Mohammed Abu Salha. Mr. Barakat and his wife, who had just gotten married a month ago, were from Chapel Hill, while the younger sister was from Raleigh. The deaths have prompted a Twitter campaign called #MuslimLivesMatter. CARE, the nation's leading Muslim civil rights organization, released a statement saying, quote, based on the brutal nature of this crime, the past anti-religion statements of the alleged perpetrator, the religious attire of 2 of the victims, and the rising anti-Muslim rhetoric in American society, we urge state and federal law enforcement authorities to quickly address speculation of a possible bias motive in the case. Now, Courtney, if indeed this was a hate crime, how serious a problem do we have here in the U.S. of Islamophobia?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're going to have to wait for all of the evidence to come in to determine whether this shooting was, in fact, racially motivated. But I think my skepticism is probably shared by many who very seriously doubt, as the Chapel Hill police have claimed, that these 3 young people were killed over a dispute over a parking spot. Islamophobia is a global phenomenon, as we've seen in recent weeks in events in Europe and elsewhere. And the problem is no less pronounced here in the United States and has been deepening and worsening, I would argue, since September 11th, 2001. So this is a very serious problem that we need to deal with. And these deaths are the tragic outcome of increased Islamophobia, I think, everywhere.
And we'll certainly follow the story. A New York City grand jury has finally decided to indict a police officer for the fatal shooting of an unarmed black man. 28-year-old Akai Gurley was shot and killed by Officer Peter Liang in the stairwell of a Brooklyn housing project last November 20th. It's not yet known what charges Mr. Liang faces. Meanwhile, another incident of police violence has come to light in Huntsville, Alabama. A 57-year-old Indian man who was visiting his son's family was severely beaten by 2 white police officers from the neighboring town of Madison last week. According to media reports, the attack left Mr. Suresh Bhai Patel, quote, bleeding from the face, paralyzed, and in need of surgery to fuse 2 vertebrae. An attorney retained by Patel's family speculated, I think it was because he looked brown. Mr. Patel is not fluent in English and apparently attempted to explain that he was visiting his son during the altercation. The attorney added, quote, it just takes a little bit of miscommunication, and the officer thinks violence is the solution. Courtney, do you agree that our police officers are trained to respond at the drop of a hat with violence? Of course, especially if the people they're interacting with are black or brown.
I think absolutely. I mean, I think both of these cases really point to how widespread this culture of racist policing really is in our country. I mean, black and brown people do not enjoy full and equal protection under the law. And I think that it's clear that they can have zero expectation that their civil liberties will be respected or protected when they interface with law enforcement. And so this is really a very serious problem that requires real reform, and that won't happen until the federal government really steps in to rein in these overwhelming abuses of power by the police.
And finally, in international news, a major European summit in Belarus will attempt to tackle the ongoing crisis in Ukraine starting today. Russian President Vladimir Putin just announced that he will attend the summit personally. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande will also be present. At stake is whether the conflict between Western Europe and Russia over Ukraine will result in a truce or a full-blown war. The United Nations has estimated that already more than 5,000 people have died and nearly 13,000 wounded since the start of the conflict. The U.S. and many European nations have been supplying Ukraine's military with weapons, while Ukrainian separatist rebels have received support from Russia. Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko has called for, quote, an immediate, absolute, and entirely unconditional ceasefire and to start a political dialogue. Well, Courtney, how serious is the situation, and what is the likelihood that a truce could be struck?
Well, the stakes are very high, and I think that there are some of the involved parties in these negotiations understand just how high these stakes are, and really what the dangers that lie ahead of us if we aren't able to negotiate some kind of ceasefire in Ukraine. It seems, though, that there seems to be some talk from the members of the Russian delegation who are participating in the talks that certainly that there is an interest in seeing these talks conclude successfully. One Russian official said under anonymity that he believed that there was about a 70% chance that things could be worked out. But we have some very loud hawks who are talking here in the United States from both sides of the aisle, urging President Obama to arm Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. And this, I think, would be a mistake. If we do that, Russia will almost certainly read that as an act of aggression and will further escalate its own aggression in Ukraine. And so the talks today that are happening are critical and really are necessary if we are going to avoid basically a civil war in Ukraine that would be a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. So it's quite serious.
Courtney Morris, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is our daily Newsflash guest expert on Wednesdays. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. This is Uprising. When we come back, we'll speak with Brian Stevenson about a new report just released by the Equal Justice Initiative about lynchings in the United States. Stay tuned.